what art actually is. And there are probably songs on the radio that I wouldn't call art. I think they're just pure, they're pure commerce. The commercialism is so over the top. There's so many cooks in the kitchen. The intention is not to express something beautiful or moving. It's just to make money. It's just market research of what kind of songs get in people's heads and what do people want right now. And then they just turn that out. And it's like, I don't think that's art. And a so like AI is not a threat to that. You could probably use AI to do that very effectively. I think art is that stuff that humans wrestle with, and that is that witnessing, that like struggling to create that song or that poem or that painting that is like, you see that beautiful God spark thing.
I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Real Unity. Today's guest, Jacqueline Clare, is a contemporary sacred artist based in the Texas Hill Country. During our conversation, we muse on her creative process, her perspective on art and AI, and what it was like being raised in a multi-generational artistic lineage. The granddaughter of sci-fi writer Keith Laumer and niece of pioneering rock photographer Tom Wright, who photographed The Who and the Rolling Stones, Jacqueline grew up painting in her mother Sabrina Laumer's studio. Now she lives and works close to the land, where homestead life deeply informs her artistic world, offering a pause, a return to themselves, and a threshold to a more beautiful world. Well, Jacqueline, it's good to see you.
It's good to be with you, Sienna.
It's always a gift to have you on, and we connected about 5 years ago, so we've both been through some changes, and I think what's made our friendship really rich is that it's rooted in spiritual and creative principles. So not just like ideology and what we have in common beyond, what we think and believe, but how we're creating a new world and stepping into something new. So when we first talked back in 2020 and officially on the mic in 2021, the framing of your story was the hero's journey. And in countless films, stories, books, we know that the first step of that main character is to cross a threshold, to step out of their comfort zone and create something new, which is essentially, the first step that an artist takes every day, such as yourself. And I noticed I was looking on your new website that you define your paintings as thresholds into the unseen and timeless portals. And you've been rebranding yourself as an artist. So, what are some of those steps that you've taken on your own journey, and what's new about your identity as an artist as of late?
Sure. What a fun question. Well, I don't know if I would necessarily even say new or rebrand. It's more of just a natural maturation and evolution of a deepening of the path that I was on, and just starting to focus more intensely on what matters to me. And I did think about my life in the hill country and sort of homesteading and stuff, how that has affected me and how that's influenced the art. And I really think that there
Mhm.
is a strong connection, because I hesitate a little bit, because part of it's just like a natural thing that everybody goes through as the years go by, and you start to evolve and you start to change and you start to like realize that your life is finite. That sort of invincibility of youth starts to fade a little bit, and you realize, oh, what does my life mean, and what matters to me. And living close to nature and cultivating nature with animals and plants and stuff, I found that a couple of things. It took a lot of time. It was taking time away from my myriad of activities, very like many of which were external. I think the art is a very, it has external fruits, but it's a very internal process. It's quiet. It's literally watching paint dry. It's not often Instagram worthy, like maybe the finished product you want to share with the world, but it's a very cultivated process. But there was a lot of other stuff that I was doing in service of bringing that artwork to the world that was very extroverted and very like content driven and that sort of thing. And living on a homestead, one took time, and two took a real like a stripping away and an appreciation for what might seem like invisible labor, which is really more gestational labor, being able, having to nurture things and put in work that didn't have immediate results, right? You have to wait for the plants to grow. You have to plant and you have to water and cultivate, but there's nothing to show off. In my case, it wasn't like content worthy, it's messy and I'm learning and all this stuff. So as like an Enneagram 3 and moving from maidenhood to womanhood, I started to develop a deeper appreciation for things that weren't content worthy, wasn't about what am I showing the world. It's really what is the long-term vision of the path that I'm on, of this finite life, but hopefully somewhat of a unlimited impact. And so the artwork I realize the is my calling. It's the thing in my heart that I want to stick with, that I want to see evolve with me. So the subject matter hasn't changed any more than just a continued creative evolution, but the importance that I place on it, the honor that I place on the art of keeping my own calendar open so that I have more attention to focus on creating the art. And then also that is reflected in how I'm sharing the art with the world, that it isn't about like, look how much I can produce. And, I'm online all the time and I make videos and I do this. It's like very much like giving each painting space and breathing room to honor the depth of that portal invitation that the artwork is, and also giving viewers, collectors, that space for the artwork to be something that is an invitation that they can step into, and that hopefully awakens something in them. I'm not trying to preach anything. I'm not trying to give answers or conclusions. I'm hoping to offer a space of beauty and nourishment that can be stepped into, and it reveals something internal to each viewer.
And what I'm hearing is aspects of feminine mysticism, which I know is an intentional focus of your work. And
Ah,
we've talked about like coming into one's feminine. What does that mean? It's a case by case basis. But much of what it means to be feminine, even just in the material sense, is going within your womb, is like just anatomically we are, we are more internal in the way that we work and the way that we're wired. And that's what I see happening in your work as well. It's not even so much that the work and the production is changing as much as like the what's going on behind the scenes and how you're making meaning of it is changing. A nature-related metaphor that came to mind when I was reading your passage, to paint is to pack for a journey whose destination I don't know, and also to take that journey step by step is Anne Lamott's metaphor of taking the writing process bird by bird. And I think any form of art, whether it's performance-based or painting or whatnot, there's so much that happens prior to its release, almost like releasing a bird. And being in tune with that and being able to like articulate, for example, how homesteading and being in tune with nature can enrich the creative process, not necessarily distract from it, I think is really integral to many of our creative processes. And I'm glad that we're making that clear connection between nature and perhaps opening yourself up as a vessel to God, who debatably is the greatest artist himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. I was looking at one of your paintings here. You were once a dream. This, honestly, I'm tempted to buy a print of this one. It is glorious. I'm just going to read the description of it, and then I'd love to hear maybe like about your own dream landscape too, or just what inspired this one. You describe it as a vision bathed in light, capturing the quiet grandeur of nature of this luminous blue sphere we call Earth, our humble, motherly home. So there's that feminine reference again. Like the childhood ritual of naming shapes in the clouds, the moonlit face of a woman emerges from abstraction, suggesting reverie, divine thought, and sacred beginnings. And just coming along here to the archetypal of the feminine, tranquil reverence, and holding emotional drama in depth in a womb-like atmosphere. There's a softening, there's a sacred transformation in this piece, and it's just really poised in the way that it's presented. Could you say more about like how this came about? Was it from your own dream landscape or something else?
Sure. Well, my paintings all emerge. I start putting color on the canvas and I rarely set out to depict an idea. So that's one thing that I think makes them so special is that it's not me being like, "Hey, I have this cool idea, check it
Mhm.
out." It's like it literally evolved through me and I just tried to nurture and cultivate it and be like, "Wow, I kind of see a profile in the clouds here, and I'm going to evolve that." So it was not me intentionally putting an idea down, it emerged. However, there is a lot, in my subconscious that emerges in the work and things that I find beautiful and mystical and exciting. And I always see human forms in nature. I always see bodies and profiles in the shadows on mountains and in clouds. And I feel like trees often look like dancers suspended in motion, like it gives me chills even saying that because I really do live in that space. That is how I see so much of nature. And I think even the ugliest city at the right time of day is like so glorious because of the light and the shadows. And I have a theory that most art is a creator trying to share with other people that God spark that they witness. There's something that that moves them, that they feel, and it's not always fully even articulated in their own mind, but I believe it's what drives them. And you're like trying to like capture that thing that I see that is God or that's a spark of life and it's beautiful, and trying to share it in a way where other people might see it in the way that you do. And so I think that that's what's going on in these paintings. They really are a play or a dance with paint, and they just start to emerge. But there is this receptivity. I kind of rolled my eyes because I don't want to use the word channeling because I don't see it as like possession. But there is, whether it's coming directly from God, from the divine, or it's sort of filtered through my own subconscious and my own impressions, um, emerging through that process where I am trying not to tell you anything in particular, still that like witness of God and of beauty and of grandeur is coming through in the work.
Yeah, I think framing it as observation or bearing witness is kind of unique as compared to channeling and creating. You know, it's like, yes, there is maybe a communing with God in that process, but it's more of a like taking a moment to really witness that spark of God and consider how you can convey it to another and say, hey, do you see what I see? And when you were describing trees in that childlike way, it reminded me of the island of Madeira in Portugal. There's a forest. Some people refer to it as like a fairy forest, but I believe it's called Fanal Forest, where I've been. I went with a couple of our with our friends actually 2 years ago, and it's like it's on a high altitude, so it's actually quite cold up there, even in the hotter summer months, and it's like misty and just otherworldly. And the trees, the way they reach down to one another, or to you, if you kind of position yourself in a certain way, you can get these photos as if like you're like interacting with the trees. And there's so many places like that on Earth that I feel like people maybe take for granted, or like maybe we'll instead like venture to the big cities and take photos of architecture, you know, rightfully so. Um, but there's the natural wonders that are not just, you know, in the big on the big spots of the planet, but just like even within your own yard. So I know that you wanted to talk more about your gardening and how that's influencing your work. And you know, we're in December now, so the roots are laid to rest at this moment. But what's been growing for you outdoors, and what's that been like for you as an artist?
Sure. Well, one, I kind of want to share something because of what you just said of the fairy island and the mountain and the high place where you witness these. And and I will answer that about the land because it has played a role.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. I just want to share something that also, because you had asked about what my own dream space was like, which is not particularly mystical. However, and for all I know, I might have shared this on another podcast with you, but I think it's particularly relevant to this show. Um, so years ago, acting was my focus for the first part of my young adult life, and very seriously so. And somewhere in the middle of that, I think I was just about to move to LA or something. It was very deep in what I was doing. And it was long before I really realized that painting was my beckoning love that had been there all along. And I had a real dream when I was asleep. And in this dream, I was hiking in these arid mountains by myself. And I was up on a high place and I could see into the distance. And I recognized the view in front of me. I recognized it as a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, not a particular one, not a real one, but in the dream logic, it made sense. I was like, oh, the view in front of me, this vista, is exactly such and such Georgia O'Keeffe painting, which means I'm standing exactly where she did to paint this, because it's exactly this view, right?
Mhm.
And so in this dream, I found myself literally standing in Georgia O'Keeffe's place. And I thought it was a cool dream. Obviously, I remembered it, but I was acting at the time like it didn't have any I didn't see any personal relevance to it. But now I do, and I take a lot of strength from that dream, kind of like I got this vision or this message, and not to emulate her or anything like that, but she is this wonderful symbol of a very embodied woman who was a groundbreaking artist, radically feminine in the work that she made in a male dominated industry at that time, and also very rooted and connected to land and to space, her physical environment. So I wanted to stick that in because it just connected so well with what you said and what you had asked me. And then as far as the land itself, my little hill country homestead, I keep using that quote unquote because homesteady has is like kind of become a bit kitschy and like lifestyle-y. And I actually didn't even know that word when we started this process here. But we had this vision of being on land that had water and where we could learn to be more self-sufficient in terms of food production. So we have lots of chickens and gardens and sheep. And really, it's been a real crucible. It's been a transformational space and environment because it's very challenging. You know, there's a reason why we have progressively outsourced all of our food production. It's because it's demanding and it's hard, and you're at the mercy of environmental factors and things like that. But you know, as but we've also outsourced a lot of things. Like it's a slippery slope, outsourcing food production, outsourcing food preparation, outsourcing the raising and educating of your children. I mean, that's like a big leap, but it is on the same trajectory. People outsource playtime with their own pets. You know what I mean? Like, why do you have a pet if you hire somebody else to play with it and take care of it, you know? And so it's just like a couple of steps along the path of reclaiming some of that connection with nature and with life and with the cycles of nourishment that we need, whether it's relational or with the earth and food, beauty, so on.
Thank you for sharing the dream. I do want to go back to that because we did talk quite a bit about your career in acting in an earlier episode, but I don't think you've shared the dream before, and it's really relevant to uh, different mediums of art. So there's performance based, and then there's, for example, painting, where you're like, "Behold, look what I see. Do you see what I see?" And performance based art, a lot of psychic energy goes onto the self, onto the performer. The audience is watching you ex kind of
Mhm.
experience yourself or experience a story, a character. Whereas with painting, and in that dream even, you've kind of stepped into both an experiential role, but also like the role of an observer. In that case, you're beholding this form of a Georgie O'Keeffe painting. Which in your mind made perfect sense that that's what it was. Did you ever maybe come across one of her paintings that confirmed like that it was indeed somewhere close to one of her pieces?
Not exactly, no, but when I went to her museum or the museum dedicated to her in Santa Fe, I saw this little tiny framed pencil drawing that was her marking the colors in the sky. She just like put little lines and wrote the colors because there was like an interesting progression that she wanted to capture. And again, at this time, I wasn't focused on art. However, I was, I grew up with art. You know, it was like something that I just took for granted. That's why I say I wasn't focusing on it, but I always had a sketchbook with me kind of situation.
Mhm.
And at that time, I was traveling a lot. I was a spokesmodel for a car brand, and I was traveling to different cities for their auto shows. And so I was in airplanes a lot. And I had a little ratty sketchbook that I'd had for a long time and stuffed in backpacks and stuff when I was traveling. And I had been on an airplane and I had noticed how interesting the progression of the colors were in the sky. And I had only a pencil with me and I had drawn something, you know, that showed the lines and the colors. And so I had already done this and I even had it, you know, in my suitcase. And I went to this museum and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like the same thing.
Wow.
I'll
Oh
have to
my
find it.
gosh. You should. Yeah, I feel like that should be. I mean, not to bring this back to content creation, because of course you were, what you were saying earlier, but I feel like that side by side should be on your website. Like that's such an interesting story.
Well, I have many decades to go before I prove the
Right,
correlation,
the
but
correlation like, yeah, between you and Georgia O'Keeffe, but that's
uh,
beautiful. Well, that actually leads into your childhood and the rich lineage behind you. I know you grew up in your mom's studio. Your mom is a fellow painter, and made note here that you're the granddaughter of science fiction writer Keith Is it Laumer?
Laumer is how we say
Laumer.
it, but Laumer, Lamer, however, but
Lemaire. Okay. Um, yeah, and also the niece of pioneering rock photographer Tom Wright. So there's much that shapes your imagination, maybe even subconsciously and
mhm.
quite clearly, through your mother's influence. And your mother's a fantastic woman. I've met her and seen her studio. So there's a clear connection between you in many ways, but in the realm of motherhood, femininity, and creation, artistic creation, how did she inspire you, and how did these also male figures come into your creative process and just kind of the way that you tick as a person?
Yeah. Well, it is something that I really just took for granted for a big portion of my life because it was so much like a language that we spoke, or, I mean, almost air that was breathed, because everyone in my family is very creative. It was never like a choice, it was never a posturing, even though people had careers in the arts, it wasn't even like a career choice. It was just like who they were and what they did. And and I grew up with that as normal. I've joked that, in my family, the black sheep would be like a doctor or a lawyer or something very, an accountant, my goodness, something very like straight. Um, so it was just like an environment that I grew up in that was very nurturing of creativity, that just like recognized it as a vital part of life that almost didn't even need to be commented on. It just was there. And my mom has been a huge influence. Yes, we always had an art studio in the places that we lived, or she had an art studio downtown. I got to draw on the walls in the studio. Like I had a lot of freedom and encouragement. And I think, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not creative." And that might be true. We all have different strengths and talents, but I think so much of it is exposure and encouragement at a formative time. So I think I had that just absolutely in spades. My mom has demonstrated that that approach to the art being an exercise in receptivity more than in even more than self-expression, and definitely more than ideological expression. It's being receptive to what comes. She tells me, the painting, play with it and it will play back with you. So a sense of fun and ease with it. And then I would even say my grandfather, who's the writer, and my uncle is the photographer, I would say a lot of their influence was probably filtered through my mom. They were huge influences on her. And again, with my grandfather, who's a Silver Age science fiction writer, part of that was just the reality that art could be your life, that it is a career. You can create worlds and pay your bills at the same time and not have a boss or whatever. You might have an editor and a publisher, but you don't have like a traditional boss. And then my uncle, who was a rock and roll photographer, and he captured a lot of iconic pictures of the Who and the Stones and the Faces. Um, that was just like an aesthetic. He captured his time, and it happened to not be just any time. It was a very rich, visually rich, culturally intense time that people of that generation cannot get over. You know, you talk to a boomer and they still want to talk about the heyday. And then the younger generation, we still listen to that music and we still look to that time for like fashion and glamour and drama. So anyway, he was an artist who both captured and lived in a very iconic environment. So I always had, you know, it's just like it's very interesting if you think about these in terms of like their symbolism. We have like science fiction and the limitlessness of space, that final frontier. And then there's the edge and the black and white of like rock and roll, and that's sort of like a caveman energy. It's like a glamorous caveman energy and very like strong stylistically. And then with a very sincere spiritual quest for truth and beauty and humility and devotion. So it's just like a lot of interesting influences that, again, as I'm maturing, as I'm getting older, I realize are really important to integrate and honor that these are a part of my story and what has shaped my vision.
Mm. And what prompted you to look deeper into your lineage? I think you started like a year or two ago. Um,
Mhm.
what was there something that happened where you felt like, okay, I really need to root myself in this history for a reason?
Yes, several things happened. So one was that I went on a little family pilgrimage up to Michigan to clear out my grandmother's storage unit. She actually passed away 12 years ago, but some friends were still homing a lot of her things. So I went to get her stuff, and it was a very reflective journey. I got this bronze sculpture of her face that my grandfather had made for her in the early 50s, in the early days of their marriage. I went through all these old chests full of like throwaway photographs of my uncles, and they're just like amazing, you know. They were like all his spare pictures and different things like that. I rescued some paintings of an impressionist painter that the family had hosted in England in the early 60s and had held on to his work. They had like an exchange for the family to keep some of his paintings. So it just got me thinking about where I've come from and the people that I've come from. And when we were in Michigan, people couldn't stop talking about my uncle, who's a photographer, and like what an impact he had made on them, and how, you know, and it was all this sort of like old timer reminiscing about, oh, 1972, this, you know, this show, whatever. But it was like, I mean, he has fans is too minimal of a word. It's like he captured something of these people's youth and a cultural moment that meant so much to them. And it's not isolated to a few boomers in Michigan. It's like a whole generation. And so that really got me thinking about lineage. And then simultaneously, I was contacted by a Russian scholar who is a fan of my grandfather's science fiction. And this Russian now lives in Texas, and he started doing an archival project of some of my grandfather's effects that remain. And he just reads so many allegories and allusions into my grandfather's essentially pulp science fiction, paperback, you know, books. But he's told me that Dinosaur Beach, which was one of my grandfather's books, in his opinion, is the most important book of the 20th century. You know, like he sees so much into it. And I'm not saying like he's right or he's wrong, but he's not just like some random eccentric. He is like a very educated, scholarly individual who sees a lot of significance in what I thought were just boy stories, you know, just boys in space, like fighting and stuff. I thought it was cool, but I didn't take it very seriously. But yeah, I just thought it was neat. And then finally, I I have tied my presentation in the past, my content, not my art specifically, but the way I talk about my work, I've tied it very much with my spiritual path. And I honor that and I want to continue doing that, but I also want to do that in a way that allows me more space not to be so associated with like a particular religious path. Um, my my religious convictions have not changed. However, I have noticed the value in those having more breathing room and more of like a sacred privacy. So I would say all three of those things have led me down a path of like really appreciating family and my formative experiences and formative visual impressions and spiritual impressions more than I had in the past.
Sacred privacy is a good way to put it. And it's, funny enough, when you're an artist, especially, an actor or anything performance based, you don't seem to get a lot of privacy. Um, and I wonder if that's part of like maybe why you moved from acting to other forms of art where you could kind of sit back and like more like just be yourself. I know there were other reasons for you leaving the Hollywood sphere, but when you look at like someone like the photographer in your family who had fans, and then of course the people who he was photographing, they had fans. So there's all of this psychic energy, there's all of this observation, all these eyes on you as an artist and on the other artists, and there's like this layering um of just people watching you. And
Mhm.
and then, inevitably the individual, like on the other side, just kind of needs to be left alone to commune with God or whatever they believe in and watch for those little moments of inspiration. Um, I mean, what do you make of like kind of like the psychology of fandom and like what that does to an artist?
I think it's very heavy thing to bear. I it's understandable that people would be fans, and a lot of struggling creators are looking to fulfill something egoically. They want that. They want to feel recognized and important and, make up for something in their, something unfulfilled. However, the handful that achieve it, it does seem like a very heavy burden. One, I think it makes the creative process a lot more difficult because you suddenly feel like you have to answer to people. You have people looking over your shoulder. There are expectations. How will people receive this instead of just like being in the flow of making something for the madcap passion and love of doing it? And then, like, from a spiritual perspective, we don't empirically know the effects of it. We just see the results of how many famous people struggle with relationships, with substance abuse. I think it's very heavy, and I think it's probably a really good thing that society has moved we've moved in two directions. On the one hand, we don't have celebrity at the level we used to because we're more of a niche market than a mono market than we used to be. But so that I think is positive. There's like less people, there's less eyes on most creators because they're niche creators instead of mainstream. But then on the other hand, with social media, everyone can be a celebrity and everyone can operate if they choose to. That's the thing. Social media is very voluntary and people are like purposely putting themselves in the position of like always having eyes over their shoulder. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think that is very difficult on relationships. I think it skews like the decisions people will make in life and their expectations in life. If I had been, if I had known what I was getting into, starting this homestead lifestyle, and if I had been prioritizing being like a little mini sphere celebrity through social media, I wouldn't have done it because it's just like it's too hard to take Instagram worthy pictures all the time, you know? If that had been, if I had known, and if that had been the priority. So, so yeah, I think most people are very blessed to have their anonymity when they want it. It's a good thing.
Yes, and at the same time, of course, to make a career out of your art, you do need some sort of
Yeah.
backing, and maybe not fans per se, but yeah, how do you balance that in your mind and just kind of logically, like how do you balance having that sacred privacy with making a living from what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is being honest when you do get a chance to share, like now with you, to 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 be very honest and as transparent as is comfortable.
Mhm.
But then it's also about like choosing what you want to share. I don't have social media on my phone, and it's like it's a bit of a barrier, it's a bit of a limitation, but it's really great for me psychologically because it helps me be very intentional about what I share. It's not like, oh, I'm at a birthday party and I want to take a picture to share it. It's like, no, that's for me. That experience is personal. If I want to share that later in some context, I can, but the Tim I can't act on any temptation in the moment to do it. So it just creates intentionality around it to use other devices for social media for output. So that's how I navigate it. And I'm not necessarily any like role model for it. And it's always like something that's evolving and there's things to learn about how to best use media or social media as an artist or a creator or somebody who does engage in some form of commerce. Um, but yeah, that's how I navigate it. I just remember that I try to share as an artist rather than sharing as a person. But as an artist, I try to be very honest and share my heart and where I really am.
Yeah, I have noticed that there have been a few YouTube videos on your channel in recent months and on very choice topics, and I can tell that your focus is not so much on content creation, but elsewhere. But one of the topics that you covered was AI, and
Oh yeah.
interestingly, you don't seem too threatened by AI as an artist.
Mhm. I'm not. I'm optimistic that we might be a wonderful team, you know? It can be there I've talked to filmmakers who have said no longer are they limited in the stories they can tell by budget. An independent filmmaker can now do a historical timepiece or sci-fi piece, which they couldn't in the past. Photographers have told me how, they've always been able to like remove something from a picture that didn't serve the composition, but now they can do it so much faster. It's like we might be a wonderful team. And I understand, and I say that knowing that the most obvious, like matrix view of it is that we won't be, and that it'll destroy us and, eat our souls and all that stuff. Um, I think it does run the risk of making us dumber, not because it is inherently wrong, but because we don't have to work as hard for our ideas, for our grammar, for our, synthesis of life, because it can write essays for us and that sort of thing. So we don't get the benefit of building those muscles. I also am very snobby about what art actually is. And there are probably songs on the radio that I wouldn't call art. I think pure they're pure commerce. The commercialism is so over the top. There's so many cooks in the kitchen. The intention is not to express something beautiful or moving. It's just to make money. It's just market research of what kind of songs get in people's heads and what do people want right now. And then they just turn that out. And it's like, I don't think that's art. And a so like AI is not a threat to that. You could probably use AI to do that very effectively. I think art is that stuff that humans wrestle with, and that is that witnessing, that like struggling to create that song or that poem or that painting that is like you see that beautiful God spark thing. And I just don't think AI is ever going to compete with that because that's not what it is. It's not human, doesn't have a soul. And so I think it's a tool. And historically, we don't use tools very well. So there's a high chance that things will go awry. But there is the opportunity that the tool can be used really effectively to expand what artists are capable of.
It's possible. It really depends on the individual's use, and I think as a writer, I've just had to come to terms with the fact that if we don't ride the wave, it's going to ride us out. Um, I mean, when we consider like the role of an artist as the observer, as like bearing witness to God's sparks and trying to communicate those moments and say, did you see what I see? And we look at like ChatGPT, for instance. ChatGPT only sees what we see. It's really just a mirror, not only of what we as the individual are putting into it, but everybody, everything that already exists, that is already being seen, is already being created is in that tool. So it's not really producing anything new.
I agree 100%. And uh and that's why I don't think it's a threat to real art, which is crossing into those lands of the unknown.
Mm. The thresholds of the unseen. I love that I love that phrase on your site. Because I think it's very spiritual, like to know that you're on a threshold, but you don't know where you're going. You just know that you have to take that step. And a belief that we've shared and that we've like mused on behind the scenes over the years is that we're creating some sort of divine civilization, that humanity is taking a really big step into the unknown, but we know, or we can fathom, that this new world will be divinely inspired somehow. We'll have spiritual principles and spiritual truths. And I want to believe that, but it's not just belief, it's like an intentional creative process. We have to decide not to fall with the old, not to to sort of self-destruct, but rather to take part in the creation of something new.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
And there are some like some principles pretty clearly stated, I would say, in like some of your work. What's like a guiding principle right now that is top of mind for you and like influencing what you're creating these days?
A top of mind principle influencing what I'm creating in light of a divine civilization or
Yeah.
just, mm, hmm, I don't know if this is a satisfying answer. I'm really trying to do two things. I'm really trying to just show up more consistently with respect for the process, with reverence, like to be there because I respect the work and the process, not because I want to finish X number of pieces this year. And then to play more. I really just want to for there to be more spaciousness and play in what I'm creating. So it's kind of answering your question by not worrying about the question and just taking care of my own little spark of joy, um, while being like reverent and participatory, but just being in the state of play more.
No, I love that because rather than enforce like this is what's true, this is, these are the principles that we must adhere to create a better world. Like, I mean that if you do it that way, you're just creating a new form of what we live in now, like that top-down control. But yeah, play is so integral in the creative process. And like when you were imagining like the shapes in the clouds, like that's what every kid on the planet probably does from time to time. I was in a production of Alice in Wonderland actually. I played a flower. And it only dawned on me when we were actually performing the game scene that we were basically just playing, like, because it was mostly improv, and people were just watching us play. It was like kids do this all the time, except for it was an official scene.
Was this recently?
It was in the summer.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
wonderful. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, how refreshing. How refreshing to play. And I'm sure the audience got as much out of it as you to be a witness to. It's like a return to Eden. It's like remembering like, oh yeah, we have this capacity to be creative and play.
Yeah, not have to script it all as well. And like the audience actually participated. They were invited in from time to time. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring up actually two more of your paintings here. There was the Moonlight Cathedral, the quiet altar of vine and moon. Um, and again, there's the theme of feminine mysticism in that painting. It's both a sanctuary and a symbol and a portal into a deeper way of seeing. So rather than me rattle off like, what I think of the painting and how you describe it, why did you pick that as two out of the three paintings that you feel are like relevant to your femininity in your art and your love of nature?
Yeah. Well, that one has it has a rose, a green rose. So it has this very strong botanical symbol, which is very feminine. It's like fertility and womanhood. There's the moon, which I always feel as a feminine presence. She's like constant and ever changing at the same time, right? She's always there, but she's always changing. And she's like this pearl in the sky. I just love the moon. And then it also has the vines and this like old sense of upward motion. And for me, the painting does invite this musing about the reverence of nature itself. If nature has its own prayers, and in that painting, it's as if the vines might be reaching up and worshiping the sky or the moon or some just like sense of holy connection there. And I just think that's a beautiful thing to ponder, just like we were talking about, the shapes in the clouds and the trees being dancers suspended in motion, this sense of the inner life of nature and the reverence. And does nature pray? And if so, what does that look like? So, so that's why I brought that painting up in the light of our conversation about land or unity or art. It has a entwining of all of those ideas.
And botanical illustration, I feel like is somewhat of a lost art. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
would you ever call yourself a botanical illustrator or consider doing that kind of work?
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about that before. I am sort of poised to do that because I drawing was my introduction into painting, and I do illustrate, and then I'm also learning to cultivate the life that grows out of the ground. So I'm poised for that. I hadn't considered calling myself that because that is a we tend to picture a very specific aesthetic for that. But I love those. I love botanical illustrations, for something like simple and old fashioned. They're really beautiful. And so yeah, I might do a little bit more study into the anatomy of flowers for my paintings for sure.
Yeah, I love some of the old-fashioned illustrations of flowers with distinct personalities. And some people who've had near-death experiences have experienced in heaven flowers being able to sing and to talk and almost kind of like spirit guides, like encouraging them to move along, which is my form of heaven. So I want to believe that's true.
That is so moving. I have not heard that. But why not? And it speaks to that question, like does the blade of grass know to bend in the wind? We see it as like this like material cause and effect thing, but like it is possible it has a consciousness. And like do flowers pray? And I'm not trying to get super hippy dippy over here. It's just like it's such a beautiful thing to ponder. And we talked in one of our other interviews about, in general, we live in a world that is very devoid of mysticism. And I think that that's part of, what different ideologies have capitalized on in the minds of young people, that they're offering them a little more magic and a little more mysticism. And if you just think about the possibility of like flowers being your guardian angels and like greeting you in heaven, that's pretty exciting. That adds a lot of magic to life.
Yeah, I mean certain flowers like pansies and irises, like they already seem to have human faces. Um, Oh, daffodils have been portrayed like that too, like to be able to like sing and dance. And I guess Alice in Wonderland is probably the most obvious depiction in relatively modern art. But yeah,
Mhm.
on a spiritual level, like people have had real experiences of flowers, not only like kind of just existing in the afterlife. I mean, I don't know if like they pass from here to there and continue on, but like actually as yeah, as like guides or angels or who knows. But I would just love to see, um, I would love to see like the flowers kind of coming to life in their own rights, even within your art. Like I'd be curious to see what that could look like through your eyes, of course. I know some people will do some pretty hippy dippy plant medicine rituals just to have flowers talk to them.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah, thanks for telling me that.
yeah. Well, the third painting we were taking a look at is She Can Hold All Things as an invitation to stand and witness to the human condition, to wrestle in grace. And you call it a portrait of radiant stillness and strength, honoring the sacred feminine as a vessel. Um, I'm just looking at it here. Why would you say that this could be depicting like a mother line or a feminine polarity and like how does one wrestle in grace?
Mhm. Well, the painting appears to be full of contradictions. It has these like very sharp lines. So it has this like very strong geometry. It's very black and then it's very light filled. And then there's this botanical that's red and blue. So it kind of like speaks to like veins and lineage. But to me, there's something like deeply feminine about the image to an extent I can't necessarily articulate. I can say that the painting evolved over a very long period of time, which is not to say the painting took a long time. It's really more I worked on it in stages over a span of time. And it started as a painting of some flowers that I did. I was visiting my mom, and her mother had just passed away.
Mm.
And, suddenly, unexpectedly, and fortunately, I was already visiting her at that time. And so I painted these flowers. And so I always have this association of my mom and my grandmother with these flowers. And the painting evolved and um and I think that women, we are we are highly nuanced. We are very complex. Humans are, but I think women are particularly complex because we do change so much in throughout the month and throughout a life. And I also thought about the painting, or the title comes from this reflection on relationships, and that someone, these are just hypothetical, like broad general examples, but like somebody, your parents, your siblings, grandparents, can both hurt you deeply, like have really made aspects of your life really challenging, more than they needed to be, and at the same time be like your biggest advocate, or have been there to help you the most profoundly at some point in your life when you really needed it. Or someone can be your best friend and also like the biggest pain in your side, like these ideas that they can both be true. We aren't just a monster or an angel, or all light or all darkness. And I think of that a lot with mothers. Mothers are the gateway to life. They nourish you and they bring you into this place, but mothers can also hurt, and they can be smothering, and they can leech from you, because they're human. And so I just really wanted to celebrate that as something beautiful, like to celebrate the complexity and the floral, the life, and then also the like really harsh edges, and that many things can be true at the same time. And for me, as a woman, that I can also hold that understanding with love and with grace. That I can look at people with humanity, and, you know that many things can be true at the same time, and I can handle it, you know?
Yeah, I love that. Um, Also kind of reminds me of like the complexity of a rose. Of course, in order to grasp a rose, you have to risk the thorn. And Also, there's like those kinds of people who you would rather have as a friend than as an enemy, like because if they're on your side, they're your biggest advocate. But they're also maybe the types of people who are gonna tell you the hard truths when you need to hear them, and that's actually like that is a form of love, however hard it might be to experience it.
Yes, I agree with you completely.
Mhm. And you are in the process of creating community. I know you're hosting a salon in the coming weeks. How can people find you and join that gathering? Because as I understand it, will be online, right?
Yes, it will be online. It's basically imagining. So, you go to an art show in person and you get to look at the paintings and you see the brushwork, and then you might hear the artist talk a little bit. And I was thinking, how can I create something like that, but that exists online? And it'll be a live event, and then there will be a version of it that will be available later. But how can I create that same sense of immersion through an online experience? And that's what I'm cooking up. And I've always, as you've already, shared and talked about on my behalf on this episode, seeing art as a threshold, as an invitation, that I don't want it to be like, look at what I made, but rather let's use this as a starting point to like explore something together. And so like how can I create that in an online experience, so that people from different locations can be there, and you don't just have to be in Central Texas to experience the show. So this salon is coming up. People can connect either through my website, which I have a simplified version of the domain, jclaire.art. You can access jacquelineclaireart.com. So jclaire.art. And then also on Instagram, similar, it's j.claire.art. Um, and on my website, there's a tab for the salon. And so you can sign up to be on the list to be notified when the invitations go out and the link is available. And yeah, it should really just be an opportunity, an invitation for, some sort of personal or spiritual attunement. I hope it's something people get something out of the art and the experience that is enriching to them personally, and not just, that's really cool that you made that.
Yeah, having it be a collaborative process rather than look at me or look at that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is your Facebook group still active?
Yeah, it's still there. I haven't
Mhm.
quite figured out how to use this in the new age, but it is Jacqueline Claire Art Group is there, and people can join and be witness to how it evolves and how I learn to use it going forward.
All right, great. Well, it was a gift to connect with you again,
Yeah.
Jackie, and I'm wishing you a happy new year. And of course, I will be attending your salon in February.
Very nice. Thank you. Much love. And yeah, it's going to be a great 2026.
Agreed. All right, much love.